Today, Iranistas brings you a report on an event held on Tuesday, May 30th at the American Enterprise Institute entitled The Future of Iranian Power in the Middle East. The speakers are Lieutenant General Thomas J. Trask, U.S. Special Operations Command, Vice Admiral retired Mark Fox, U.S. Central Command, and J. Matthew McGinnis from American Enterprise Institute.
Anytime you have an opportunity to get into the minds of your adversary and try to understand decision-making processes on their side, it allows you to prioritize your planning in a way that you couldn't do otherwise. And particularly with Iran, that's particularly important. I took a few specific things away from this as takeaways from a SOCOM perspective, and I will remind everybody that SOCOM is in a support position to CENTCOM for Iran planning, and within the Department of Defense, CENTCOM is in the process of going through another drill at this time on what our way ahead needs to be from a DoD perspective on Iran, and SOCOM certainly contributes to that. One of the things that we bring from SOCOM perspective is a global perspective on several issues. The reach of Iranian networks is certainly one of them, and that's one of the ways that our analysts and our planners can help CENTCOM in that regard. You're going to be able to look at this. There is enough body of evidence since the revolution of '79 to prove, I think, that as you point out in the monograph, that their actions are going to be predictable. And the fact that they don't match up to a rationale that we easily understand in the West doesn't mean they're not predictable if you spend enough time understanding the mindset, what the important aspects are to the regime, what they will do anything to fight for, and what are, as you call, conflicts of opportunity versus ones that are conflicts of survival in their minds. And that allows us as planners to develop a list of options for our leadership that are focused on that. The second big takeaway that I had is kind of related to that, and it's the idea of proportionality. And that was something that we struggled with a lot when you and I worked together, because it didn't seem proportional, and it may have been asymmetric, an Iranian response to whatever the issue was, but at least in their mindset it was proportional most of the time. And I think that's an important thing that we can use in understanding how the United States actions will affect Iranian activities going forward. So that's a probably even more important element as far as planners. Now, either way, we have to plan for as many eventualities as possible as military planners. That's going to be standard to anything that we do. And for SOCOM, though, we have to prioritize our planning efforts. We're going to continue to plan primarily against that network of proxies and unconventional warfare that Iran pushes out a way to create that buffer for the regime that you describe in the paper very well. And that's going to be the focus. And I know there's been a lot of discussion on whether increased defense budgets in Iran are going to lead to a greater emphasis on the Artesh and conventional military capability. But I think you hit it right off the bat where you said that Iranians are going to be driven by what they perceive as the threat. More than anything else, probably more than budgetary opportunities or limitations. And so that's the piece that we can still manage the same way, even if they chose to put more money in their defense spending, and particularly on the conventional side. The last point I'm making, and it has to do with the last section of your paper on developing an industrial base and whether or not it's even possible for them to really significantly increase the capability of their conventional forces internally, and how much can they depend on getting from others like Russia. And I'll tell you, and particularly the last few years that I've worked in the SOCOM area on our budgets and how we develop our decision-making process and on what we buy, that takes a long time to change. As military planners, we're going to make sure that Secretary Mattis and the President have options in either case. But our focus right now is going to be with an expectation that they're going to continue to push, and if anything, increased defense dollars in Iran are likely to go toward increasing that network, looking for ways to expand it. We've already seen evidence of them taking units and officers out of the conventional side that are working with the IRGC in Syria, and that may be an indication that that they're looking to push on that side.
So I approached the Iranian question. First of all, thank you for having me here today. From a former fleet commander's perspective, as Nav sent, I also spent a year in Baghdad back in the 2006-2007 timeframe, and the explosively formed penetrator network and the malign activities that were going on were striking to me at the time. And then in my most recent military assignment as the deputy commander at Central Command. And there's a consistent theme, and in fact, for those of us who have studied this and watched it closely since the '79 revolution, we've seen these spasms of increased tension with decreased tension, kind of an ebb and flow. And from a Western mindset, it seems like it's a very difficult thing to either anticipate or predict. From a Navy perspective, they are very much focused on the asymmetric. They like mines, they like small boats, they like a lot of different small submarines. And so the main thing in my mind as a former fleet commander is how do you prevent miscalculation? Nobody wants to go to war with Iran. Nobody wants to have miscalculation. How do you prevent that at the same time not taking the first strike? And so when I was a strike group commander a few years ago, when I was in the Gulf, the then 5th Fleet commander said, okay, I don't want you to take the first punch, and I don't want you to start a war. And so somewhere in this spectrum of potential activities, and people would ask me, how frequently do you interact with the Iranians? And it would be on a daily basis. There's a marked difference between the IRGCN and the IRIN. We've had IRIN regular Navy vessels actually render honors before to U.S. Navy vessels. So there's an entire spectrum, and the vast majority of our interactions, quite frankly, has been routine and professional. And then you'll hear us refer to it as not routine or unprofessional or aggressive or that sort of thing. So in a big spectrum of activities, we watch it closely, but you'll see contradictions in the midst of the run-up to and subsequent to the nuclear deal. Actually, the escalations and some of the activities, some of the malign activities have increased. There's been interdiction of force and flow into Yemen, for example. We're seeing a lot of the coastal defense cruise missiles. So Iran, from my perspective, has always been very much devoted to proxies and to asymmetry, and they are the masters at keeping it just at or just below the boiling point. And so it's a home game for them, and we have rotational forces that come through. And so it's always very important that you get your the commanding officers and the action officers on board ships in an aircraft to make sure that they understand how to handle this situation and to always be in a place where you're prepared. As was previously mentioned, we have a dominating ability to escalate and to control a situation, but at the same time, these are international waters and they're international airspace, and in the case of the Navy, and so they have every bit as much right to be at sea as we do. And so this is something that you watch very carefully. General Mattis, when I was 5th Fleet, used to always challenge me about, are you the boiled frog? Are you the guy that's been in this hot water long enough where it's now the norm? And so it's something that you make sure that you're not completely cooked, but at the same time, it's something that requires thought and reflection on every day. The longer you study, the Iranian psychology, I guess is the way to put it. Over the last 5,000 years, it's only been the last 500 that the West has somehow been ascendant, it seems. So that they think of themselves as globe-girdling, striding, powerful people in the heirs of the Medo-Persian Empire.
No, I think what you see happening in places like Syria, that Iran and the IRGC is facing, a situation where its capacity. This is, I think, Fred, you're pointing to this idea, what we like to call path dependency at times, where you get stuck in the way you've done war for so long, where that asymmetric warfare is not sufficient. And you've seen this slow ratcheting up of what they've been able to do in Syria, and it's not been sufficient. They're not winning in Syria, frankly. Still, after it's almost we're at 6 years now, past 6 years. And you look at, they've had to depend on Russian close air support to be able, in addition to other Russian capacity, in Syria, and that's still not doing it for them. In Iraq, they're frankly depending on American close air support. And you imagine how humiliating this is, frankly, to the Iranians. The fact that for something that is so vital to from their perceived both geopolitical and frankly ideological interests, at least in Syria. And Iraq is understandable as a buffer that they have a certain geopolitical interest in Iraq, but Syria and Levant is a combination of geopolitical and ideological interests there. For something that's so vital to them, to depend on superpowers to save them. And I can be kind of crude in describing that. It's a very humiliating thing for them. And I think this is something that, and that changing threat perception, but also at a degree of embarrassment, is pushing, I think, these changes that the IRGC itself may have to change. It may have to become something different, or the Artesh may have to become something different with the IRGC. And I think this is the big question, and I think they're struggling with it. I don't think they have figured out the answers to these questions. I think that's why we're seeing them. I think 2016 is an inflection point, because you saw the Supreme Leader talk about these issues. You see him talking about offensive. You see them changing the leadership of their Armed Forces General Staff to kind of bring in new leadership and creating a new structure there to execute these types of campaigns that you see in Syria, because they recognize it's just not working the way they've been doing it in the past. But they don't know how to fix this problem necessarily. You kind of look at our experiences in Iraq, 10 years ago. We had kind of changed our way of doing business. But I think the Iranians, as you pointed out, I think that it's going to be really tough for them. It's going to be very tough for them to do this. I don't speak for the president or Secretary Mattis or Secretary Tillerson or anyone like that. But I certainly think that the president has expressed, his concerns about the deal, and that there are serious issues with it. It is under, there is a review going on right now about, how the deal may need to be addressed in the future. Obviously there has to be, concerns weighed about other members of the P5+1 and about how any potential strategy is going to be pursued with them or without them in regards to the nuclear deal. But I think the larger issue, I think, for the U.S. is that we need to be looking at Iran from a more strategic approach, that the nuclear deal should be one component of that. I think this has been one of the flaws, frankly, of the previous administration's approach, that they tried to build everything around the nuclear deal and subordinate some of our other policies, whether diplomatic or security, to have everything kind of flow behind in the wake of the nuclear deal. And I think that we should be, in general, looking towards building a more comprehensive approach to Iran, in which the nuclear deal is more a subordinate part of that, and is supporting a larger approach that does address the larger problems that we and our allies have with Iran in the region. But again, I think it's still to be determined exactly how the administration will be approaching the nuclear deal.
I think it's very important to remember that the nuclear deal as written, not as the Iranians have interpreted it, and not as the previous administration interpreted it, but as written, the nuclear deal gives the United States wide latitude to operate against the proxy network, against the threat network, against the IRGC for all non-nuclear related activities, including with sanctions and by other means. The United States could take those actions without violating the deal. How the Iranians would react is an interesting question, and that's something that we could talk about, but it's important to understand that this the deal itself provides a lot of decisions to an administration even that has decided not to walk away from it.
You know, their efforts inside Syria, you know, they're going to fight as long as it takes in Syria. I think this is actually one of the things I point out in the monograph. At least I try to drive home the point that it was one of our early failures in U.S. policy, in my opinion, and I think in many Western capitals as well, is that we underestimated the degree to which Iran was committed to Assad, and that they will do whatever it takes to support Assad. And I think that's what the lack of understanding that among those in the previous administration and, frankly, again, many other Western capitals, and I may include perhaps even in Israel as well, that, you know, that's what undergird the belief that Assad would eventually fall, and especially in 2011 and 2012 during that time frame, which I think helped fuel some bad policy choices for many states during that period.
روز گذشته در محل مؤسسه امریکن انترپرایز در شهر واشنگتن بحث عمده درباره تهدیدهای جمهوری اسلامی در منطقه و آینده قدرت نظامی این کشور و همچنین نیروهای نیابتی جمهوری اسلامی در خاورمیانه بود. ژنرال توماس تراسک از ستاد فرماندهی عملیات ویژه ایالات متحده بحث‌هایی درباره نحوه برنامه‌ریزی برای مقابله با برنامه‌های احتمالی نیروهای نظامی جمهوری اسلامی بیان کرد. ژنرال تراسک تاکید کرد که به عنوان بخش برنامه‌ریزی ستاد فرماندهی عملیات ویژه ایالات متحده گزینه‌های مختلفی را در اختیار ژنرال ماتیس وزیر دفاع و رئیس جمهوری برای مقابله با جمهوری اسلامی عرضه خواهد کرد. یکی از مسائل مهم طرح شده در سخنان این افسر بلند مرتبه ستاد فرماندهی عملیات ویژه ایالات متحده توجه دقیق آمریکایی‌ها به فعالیت‌های نظامی جمهوری اسلامی در سوریه بود. همچنین دریادار مارک فاکس که زمانی جزو فرماندهان ناوگان آمریکا در منطقه خاورمیانه بوده است، درباره تجربه‌هایش از رودررویی با نیروهای ایرانی گفت. او میگوید که از زمان انقلاب برای غربی‌ها درک بسیاری از مسائل دشوار بوده، ولی از دیدگاه کارشناسی نیروی دریایی شکل کار نیروهای ایرانی به شدت نامتقارن بوده و روی مینگذاری، بهره‌گیری از قایق‌های تندروی کوچک و زیردریایی کوچک متمرکز شدند. او اضافه کرد که برای من به عنوان یک فرمانده ناوگان مهم این است که دچار خطای محاسباتی در مقابل ایرانی‌ها نشوم. کسی نمیخواد با نیروهای ایرانی درگیر و وارد جنگ شود و کسی هم دلش نمیخواد دچار خطای محاسباتی شود. او به افزایش فعالیت‌های جمهوری اسلامی از طریق حمایت از نیروهای حوثی در یمن اشاره کرد و گفت جمهوری اسلامی همیشه روی نیروهای نیابتی همراه با روش‌های نظامی نامتقارن حساب ویژه‌ای باز کرده. دریادار فاکس همچنین به این نکته اشاره کرد که جمهوری اسلامی با کارهای خود در سوریه احتمالاً به دنبال راه‌اندازی یک گروه نیابتی سوری مانند حزب الله لبنان است. متیو مکینیس که برنامه دیروز با توجه به گزارش اخیر او برگزار می‌شد، در تحقیقی که درباره آینده قدرت جمهوری اسلامی در منطقه انجام داده به تشریح برنامه‌های نظامی ایران پرداخت. متیو مکینیس گفت که تلاش‌های سپاه و جمهوری اسلامی در سوریه به پیروزی منتهی نشده و با وجود حضور 6 ساله در این کشور، این نیروها متکی به حمایت هوایی روسیه بودند و این حمایت برایشان کافی نیست. او گفت که در عراق نیز نیروهای سپاه متکی به حمایت هوایی آمریکایی‌ها بودند و این برای جمهوری اسلامی بسیار تحقیرآمیز باید باشد، وقتی که برای منافع ژئوپلیتیکی خود در عراق و سوریه نیاز به پوشش حمایتی ابرقدرت‌ها داشته باشند و این ماجرا شاید نشان بدهد و ثابت کند که خود سپاه پاسداران باید تغییر ماهیت بدهد. به عقیده مکینیس سال 2016 نقطه عطفی برای نیروهای نظامی ایران بوده، چرا که رهبر جمهوری اسلامی درباره این مشکلات نیروهای نظامی حرف زده و فرماندهی و رده‌های نظامی ستاد فرماندهی کل قوا نیز دچار تغییراتی شده. مکینیس میگوید که جمهوری اسلامی شاید نداند این تغییرات را واقعاً چگونه عملی کند تا به نتایج دلخواه برسد. مکینیس درباره برجام گفت: من به نمایندگی از وزیر دفاع و رئیس جمهوری و وزیر خارجه سخن نمیگویم، ولی رئیس جمهوری نگرانی‌های خود را درباره برجام بیان کرده و گفته مشکلات مهمی دارد و همین الان برجام تحت بررسی و بازبینی است که با توافق هسته‌ای در آینده چگونه باید برخورد کرد و باید به مسائل مرتبط با دیگر اعضای قدرت‌های 5+1 نیز توجه کرد و اینکه چه نوع استراتژی باید در همراهی با آنها و یا بدون آنها در ارتباط با توافق هسته‌ای به کار گرفته شود. او ادامه داد: فکر می‌کنم مسئله بزرگتر برای ایالات متحده این است که باید به جمهوری اسلامی از دریچه راهبردی بزرگتری نگاه کنیم و توافق هسته‌ای باید بخشی از آن نگاه راهبردی باشد. او گفت که دولت اوباما خطایی را در این ارتباط مرتکب شده و همه چیز را بر پایه توافق هسته‌ای شکل داده و همین باعث ضعف رویکرد آمریکا شده. مکینیس درباره حضور نیروهای نظامی سپاه در سوریه گفت که تا زمانی که این نیروها احساس کنند که باید در سوریه باشند در آنجا حاضر خواهند بود و خواهند جنگید و یکی از خطاهای ما و دیگر غربی‌ها این بود که پیش بینی نکرده بودیم که جمهوری اسلامی تا چه حدی متعهد به ماندگاری و حضور در سوریه و دفاع از بشار اسد خواهد بود. مکینیس ادامه داد: اگر غربی‌ها محاسبات جمهوری اسلامی را درک می‌کردند باید به این نکته می‌رسیدند که نظام حاکم بر ایران حاضر بوده همه کاری برای حمایت از بشار اسد انجام بدهد و الان می‌بینیم که این مسئله انجام گرفته و این رویکرد جمهوری اسلامی نشان از افزایش حمایتش دارد که سال به سال هم بیشتر شده با اینکه عملاً پیروز نشده‌اند. ژنرال تراسک در پاسخ به این سوال که نحوه تقابل و رویارویی با نیروهای نیابتی جمهوری اسلامی چگونه خواهد بود گفت: به عنوان برنامه‌ریزی نظامی ما گزینه‌های مختلفی را در اختیار دولت قرار می‌دهیم که اکثراً به دنبال درگیر نشدن با نیروهای نیابتی ایرانی هستیم، اما تمام تلاش ما برای این استوار شده که چگونه تأثیر این نیروهای نیابتی را به حداقل برسانیم، آن هم در همه جا، نه تنها در سوریه که در کلمبیای آمریکای جنوبی، و به این ترتیب مانع به نتیجه رسیدن اهداف جمهوری اسلامی از طریق نیروهای نیابتی شویم.
دانشگاه ازاد اسلامی نامی است که با 500,000 میلیارد تومان سرمایه گره خورده و همواره طی دوره‌های مختلف بر اساس منابع انسانی و مالی که داشته مورد توجه سیاستمداران گوناگونی در کشور ایران قرار گرفته. بعد از پیروزی انقلاب اسلامی و بعد از رخ دادن پدیده انقلاب فرهنگی در اردیبهشت سال 1361 علی اکبر هاشمی رفسنجانی در خطبه‌های نماز جمعه تهران خبر از تشکیل دانشگاه آزاد را داد و گفت: یکی از طرق این است که از همین امسال در هر کجا که دستمان رسید و شاید کم کم به روستاها هم بکشد، البته به شهرهای کوچک به آسانی میرسد، مراکزی درست کنیم به نام دانشگاه آزاد. 4 ماه بعد هاشمی رفسنجانی به عنوان رئیس شورای موقت دانشگاه طی حکمی با سربرگ مجلس شورای اسلامی عبدالله جاسبی را به ریاست موقت دانشگاه منصوب کرد. هیئت مؤسس دانشگاه شامل علی خامنه‌ای رئیس جمهور وقت، علی اکبر هاشمی رفسنجانی رئیس مجلس وقت، میرحسین موسوی نخست وزیر وقت، احمد خمینی فرزند و رئیس دفتر خمینی و عبدالله جاسبی تشکیل جلسه داده و جاسبی را به ریاست دانشگاه منصوب کرد. اعضای هیئت مؤسس دانشگاه اکبر هاشمی رفسنجانی به عنوان رئیس، عبدالله جاسبی، عبدالکریم موسوی اردبیلی، میرحسین موسوی و احمد خمینی بودند. پس از مرگ احمد خمینی، حسن خمینی جانشین وی در هیئت مؤسس شد. در سال 1389 نیز شورای انقلاب فرهنگی با تغییر اساسنامه دانشگاه تعداد اعضا را به 9 نفر افزایش داد و حسن حبیبی، علی اکبر ولایتی، محسن قمی و حمید میرزاده را به هیئت مؤسس افزود که پس از فوت حسن حبیبی و تصویب هیئت مؤسس و شورای عالی انقلاب فرهنگی، علی اکبر ناطق نوری جایگزین او شد. در اسفند ماه سال 1393 هاشمی رفسنجانی رئیس هیئت مؤسس دانشگاه آزاد محمد علی نوریان را به سمت دبیرکل هیئت مؤسس انتخاب کرد. پس از فوت هاشمی رفسنجانی، علی اکبر ولایتی با حکم رهبر ایران به ریاست هیئت مؤسس دانشگاه انتخاب شد. مدتی بعد از انتخاب علی اکبر ولایتی به این سمت، او که مشاور عالی رهبری در سیاست خارجی نیز هست، با استفاده از اختیارات خود جلسه اضطراری هیئت امنای دانشگاه آزاد را برگزار کرد و طی آن حمید میرزاده را از ریاست دانشگاه آزاد عزل کرد. این عزل واکنش‌های گوناگونی را در پی داشت، زیرا کمی قبل از آن نیز یاسر هاشمی، کوچکترین فرزند اکبر هاشمی رفسنجانی، از ریاست دفتر هیئت امنای دانشگاه عزل شده بود و پیامد آن حسن خمینی در نامه‌ای به رئیس جمهوری خواستار دخالت در موارد پیش آمده در دانشگاه آزاد شده بود. نماینده ولی فقیه در دانشگاه آزاد در خصوص عزل یاسر هاشمی به خبرگزاری‌ها گفته در این چند سالی که عضو هیئت امنا بودیم متوجه نشدیم که نقش آقای یاسر هاشمی در تشکیل جلسات و محتوای آن چیست، با وجودی که یک ساختمان بزرگ در نیاوران و 20 نفر کارمند در اختیار یاسر هاشمی بوده و لازم است به فعالیت‌های این دفتر و هزینه‌های آن رسیدگی شود. گفته می شود هاشمی زدایی یکی از اهدافی است که در پی این تغییر و تحولات دنبال می شود.